You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Coursey.
Josh, where do we go? Well, you're on the ground. You're in the heart of the beast here. What's next?
But I think you hit it, Dave, and Nephi, you echoed it. I think it's the process, and it is being able to be engaged, to be able to provide constructive feedback and help mold this. And if for some reason this does end up in the court of law or it is litigated, those documents, those comments, that feedback, that becomes evidence. I mean, that becomes very important information that down the road could have a very meaningful impact to how this is decided. And so I think you want to take that civic responsibility of getting that on record. And to your point, I think it's got to be, you're not a cheerleader or a critic. You're actually providing meaningful content that is important to how, and with the recognition of how this has impacts beyond just this year or 10 years from now, but potentially 20, that you are providing content that is going to be thought-provoking, but also gives the tools to the decision makers at the time to be able to make these decisions based off public support and public influence. And that process, it is a responsibility. And I just, that's the message I keep trying to get out there to the folks within our circle and our reach, is that you have a responsibility to make your voice heard, and don't sit on that. It is a blessing that no other nation in this world knows, to be able to have public lands. And as an American, to be able to step forward and have an impact of your thoughts that are far outreaching to generations that aren't even born yet, that could be dealing with this in 3 decades from now. This is the time on the timeline right now to make your responsibility a priority. You're right. November 16th, that's a big one. These little meetings that have been happening, I've had a few people ask, are you going to that? It's not that they're not important. There's certainly an opportunity for some good questions to be answered, or maybe some better understanding, or maybe to be able to see some of their large maps instead of looking at it on your computer or your tablet. But that is also just part of the process. The ultimate responsibility is that at the end of the day, your voice was heard, and that has to be done in an official format on the official forum provided by the BLM through their website.
And it's important to remember, for folks out there that are listening that are saying, does my voice even matter? I'm just one person. My voice doesn't matter. It not only does it, but this is the part I always try and impress upon people. The BLM is required as a matter of law to consider every comment received, and to the extent it's a unique comment, they have to respond to every unique comment and explain why they did or did not use the information provided in that comment. So they have to. And if they don't, they violated the law, and that exposes them to a cause of action. The individual voice matters as much as the collective voice in this type of planning process, because of the way our laws are written. Each individual citizen of this country has a very powerful voice in this planning process.
That's why telling them that they're a bunch of baboons is going to fall on deaf ears. That does nothing. Or to just say you love everything about locking an area down, that does nothing. You're right. It's the details that is going to provide the meat and potatoes for them to take action.
Yeah, it's become the way that we think now, where people want to go into our silos. We think we should argue with our friends and talk with them online about it. We're forgetting that in a situation like this, that's not what actually gets anything done. It's not being willing to talk to your friends. It's being willing to talk to people you don't agree with. And that's what you have to do here. And you have to do it in a way that is respectful, because they're going to get 1,000 emails that are going to say F you. And those emails all go in the same bin together. And they're just going to say, we got 1,000 emails that said the exact same thing. They told us where to go. But a unique email, a unique comment where you're actually talking with them about substantively, this is what I think, this is where it should be, or this is the cultural reason why it should be this, or this is the economic reason why it should be this. Those are the types of things that make a difference, because those are the things that they have to address individually. Don't just sign on to the form letter from the organization that you like and that are your friends. Take the time to actually express yourself. And now here's the challenge. A lot of times, we're in the world today, we're literally being conditioned to believe that it doesn't matter what you say, they're going to do what they want to do anyway. There's some nefarious overlord group that is they're not gonna care what you say. And that's the part that it takes a little bit of courage to get out of your box and to actually say, you know what? Yeah, I don't like the way that they did this, but I'm going to be the quote unquote bigger person and have a substantive response to that. Because if you are angry enough or that you want to comment, but you're like, but I can't do it because I just don't even like the people I'm talking to, you lost. So don't lose on this. If you have concerns, if you have something you need to say that should be said as a group or an individual, be eloquent about it. Being a statesman is something that we're losing in this country, but it is actually how the process was designed to work. And if you can do that, you can still make a difference. Now, we don't have to be part of the unheard, super loud majority or minority. We can actually be thoughtfully involved in this process if you want to be. And so think about that.
I'd also say that, and sorry, Josh, I know you've got a thought too. This is going to come right back at you. You might like this one. I would say, I know this is a huge document. It's incredibly time consuming. And so as an individual, you may look at this and it's completely overwhelming to you to dive through the details and provide substantive comments. But that's actually where people like Josh come into play. Become a member of the Muley Fanatic Foundation. Send a message to Josh and say, here are my concerns. I'm guessing that you are, and folks in your coalition that you work with are taking a deep dive into this and are going to be preparing to provide feedback on behalf of your members as well. And so to those people that say, I don't have the time to go through hundreds or thousands of pages of technical documents and then trying to get that into a form where I get my comments in. That's what some of these organizations like the Muley Fanatics Foundation are really great at, is helping elevate your voice too. And so I would say use that as a tool as well.
Yeah.
Unless I just committed you to something you weren't going to do.
No, I'm fine with that. But I just to remove the bias there are several organizations, this coalition that we have been a part of now, it represents several different groups. So we're just one of many. But individually, to Nephi's point, and I think, Nephi, you said it very eloquently. This is a process where you can and should seize the opportunity to do exactly what Nephi said, and that is be a statesman. And when you think about it and you put that statesman hat on and you wear that hat of responsibility and the stewardship of what that means as a statesman of public lands, I think that'll dial in your focus. I think that'll provide you some clarity going into that conversation to be able to provide some serious efforts of significant and thought-provoking, you hit it. You said it right, Nephi. That's exactly the approach that people should be looking at. And that will lead you to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. It truly will. I think that it's a mindset, and it's a mindset that's worth adapting right now. Yeah. Thanks for those words, David. Again, I do appreciate that. That is something our organization is doing. We will be providing comments organizationally, and then we'll also be providing comments as a coalition, and those will differ. There are some things specific to mule deer when you look at the northern part of this field office with migration corridor work that are specific to what's in our wheelhouse as a mule deer conservation organization that may be different than just our efforts as part of a coalition and just this 15% that we focused on. But yeah, there are several groups that are doing this, and yeah, we'd be happy to engage in those conversations individually with folks if they have some concerns or they have ideas. Again, it's about just being able to have good communications that can lead to good solutions.
One total sidebar little story, but there's a purpose to this. My very first time submitting to show that a single voice can matter, right? That really they do have to look at this and it actually can matter. The very first time I ever commented on a planning document of any kind was a plan revision for a national forest. And I'm not going to tell you which one, but it's a national forest where I did a lot of hunting. And there was a proposal to close down every road in the area. And I thought a lot of those closures made a lot of sense, but there were 3 roads in particular that I looked at that I thought it made sense to keep those open for purposes of maintaining opportunity for for hunters that otherwise that they can't get off trail very far. And it was an opportunity to get into some places for hunters with disabilities or limitations on how far they can walk. And I thought it was really important to keep a couple of these roads open. And I wrote a comment to that effect. A couple of other people joined me, and the final plan, 2 of those 3 roads stayed open. And it was in response to the feedback that we provided. And that third one, now fast forward 15, 20 years, they were probably right to close that one. It's made the hunting a lot better.
But you're right. To your point, you were part of the process.
Yeah. And that was my point, is just one individual. I was in my early 20s. I was still in college at the time. And I took a chance and was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to participate. And it worked. Yeah. So do it.
Yeah. And I think it's a very dangerous road when we go down where we think that our voice is no longer valuable. We've seen that at regional game and fish meetings. We've seen that at the commission. Folks just, everything's changed. They're just checking a box. They're just doing due diligence because they've been told they have to do it. No, I've seen multiple times, just like your story. I've seen multiple times where there's some personal account that has some emotion that is able to connect the dots for someone on the other side of the table, that they can see that, they can understand that, and by golly, changes. And that's ultimately what they're looking for also, is they want people to be engaged and provide feedback. They're not looking to just rubber stamp anything. Certainly a state agency isn't. A state agency is depending on its customer to be involved, and that's the public.
Yeah, and the second we lose our voice, the second we stop engaging in the process, then the thing everybody fears of having something just shoved down our throat is exactly what happens.
Yep.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You predict it, and so therefore you're not going to. So then it happens, and you're like, see? And you're like, yes, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
When you're not there.
And it's also why we have multiple layers of this process, right? So right now, this is the as Nephi said, Josh, you emphasize, this is the diplomacy phase. Be a statesman at this phase. The next phase, right? You get a final resource management plan. You get a record of decision on that.
That's a different podcast.
That's a different podcast. The motivations become different and the tactics become different, and how you respond become different. That's when the legal process kicks in, and that's a more intentionally adversarial process, right? But we're not there yet. All the rhetoric I hear about, we need to sue, over what?
We don't know.
There's a draft with a range of alternatives, and one of them happens to have a stamp next to it saying preferred that's got people fired up. But all we have is something saying, hey, here's a bunch of ideas. Tell us what you think. That's what this is.
That's exactly what it is.
A bunch of ideas. Tell us what you think. That's where we are right now.
One more note for you on your comments. So as you're creating comments, you're sending comments out to somebody. A good argument will rule the day. If you're making a good point, it actually does matter. It matters at Game and Fish Commission meetings. It matters at BLM meetings, whatever. It's important, test that point. So you think you're right. You think you've got a good idea. You think it's valuable. Find a couple of friends, but find a couple of people maybe even that you don't agree with, and work it through them and talk with them. If you can, you need to convince them too. You need to have an argument that holds water. And if your argument holds water and it's a good argument and you can effectively communicate it, you will make a difference. But you have to be able to do those things. Your argument's got to be valid. It's got to be able to be communicated effectively. And that's where the statesmanship comes in. And here's the other thing you're trying to do. It's a lot more powerful if other people agree with you and if other people are willing to comment as well. So if you've got 5 buddies, like Dave's 5 buddies, that kind of thought that he was right about his roads, not only is it important that Dave writes a letter, but that Dave was able to communicate with them his argument effectively enough so that when they make their argument, that commission or those decision makers at BLM, that they're hearing that argument from multiple credible people. So it's important. You don't want it to be exactly the same. You don't want it to be a Xerox. But when you can effectively convey your argument, when you can convince Dave that you're right, Nephi and Dave both being convinced of one thing, like we have more ability when we go into those meetings to be able to testify and talk and get the comments across that need to come across, because there's been communication and there's more weight behind more people being on the same page. Be willing to have that conversation with people besides the agency and to win over converts for your point of view before you go into those meetings. It's important, and I just want to say that.
Yeah, said, Nephi. Well said.
I have one last point, and then I have to ask Josh a question. that we always ask people on the Your Mountain podcast. I don't know if you have any last thoughts for us, but my last thought is recognizing that people on the ground, and this isn't just in Southwest Wyoming, this is anywhere in the West. I'm hard pressed to find anybody that says we shouldn't be conserving habitat. We shouldn't be doing all we can to help mule deer and elk and pronghorn and sage grouse and you name it, the suite of wildlife, and make sure that we have our sagebrush ecosystems and we have our forest ecosystems and that they're all healthy and robust. I'd never find anybody that says, I don't want that. And so I want to keep that in mind as folks are thinking through this. Everybody has a different definition of what conservation looks like. And we do have multiple use lands, and we have economies that are dependent on the land for various reasons. And how do we balance the various needs to ensure that our communities are able to thrive and our wildlife are able to thrive? And that's what I view the role that Josh, you and the coalition have been working on for all these years. Like, that's the needle you're trying to thread, is we all live here, we work here, but we also play here and we recreate here. And that's the case not just in Southwest Wyoming, that's in all of these public land spheres. It's all across the country. That's what we want. So we all have that common tie, that common thread, is like, we want what's best for our communities, we want what's best for the wildlife and the land, and it's trying to thread that needle to figure out how do we balance all of these things. And it's really complicated. And as we're seeing here, there are a lot of passions out there about how we do this. And so I really appreciate being able to have this conversation in this space. Thank you both for that. And then I have to ask Josh this question to you. We always ask people that we talk with, what's your mountain? Right? What's your place, your physical, metaphorical, whatever it is, what's that place that gives you the energy or gives you the passion or the drive or elicits some emotional response or something for you? What is that? If you're willing to share, and you can we've had people that come on and they'll give a very specific place, and some people it's very general because they don't want to give away specific places. Just curious, what's your mountain?
Yeah, Dave, that's a good question. And I certainly have an answer for you. And I think it's not an individual location. Really, I think it's, when I think about your mountain and the way you've posed that question to me individually, is like, what am I willing to climb? What am I working to summit that I cherish and I value, that warrants the effort of who I am and what I can give in my life? And that is something that I hold dear. That my mountain is, I look at my daughter and who's now married, and my son-in-law, they're in their early 20s. My youngest daughter is a senior at the University of Wyoming. So we still have one left at school, although I think she has much more schooling ahead of her that she's wanting to pursue. And I think about them as my mountain. I think about there are things that I need to be doing right now that has an impact and will make a difference for their lives when they're at this age in their life. Right now, their focus is very focused on different things at that age. And so my mountain is really these wild things in wild places that has allowed me to create so many memories with my friends, my family, and my own children. That's my mountain, is making sure that they're there down the road. And I have a specific landscape certainly that mean a lot to me. I love the Wind River Wilderness area where I go and chase elk every year, but my mountain is bigger than just one mountain range. It's a heritage and it's a way of life that I value, that I have seen is not prevalent in other areas in this fine union of ours, but it is here, and it takes work to maintain it.
That's awesome.
I don't know about that. I went on a ramble, but that's a pretty deep question.
It is, which elicits some deep answers sometimes. I love it.
Yeah, that's my mountain, man. I just called you a mountain man. That's my mountain man.
I don't have anything else. Anybody else have any other last thoughts?
I really, you hit it right on the head, both of you. It's obvious this arena is not foreign to you. I think it's a responsibility that those that have the information, that know the information, that are aware of the process, the implications of the process, that we do our part to share it. And I think that's the whole point of this platform for us. It has boded well for you in having, what did Nephi told me before? You guys are over 150 episodes now. That builds a following, and I just appreciate this opportunity. So thank you very much in letting an effort like ours be part of your process, because it's certainly doing good things.
Likewise, we appreciate all you're doing for conservation, everything you're doing on the ground, not just across Wyoming anymore. You're all over the place. Really appreciate you and your organization and everything that you're doing, not just to help educate the folks about this RMP, the on the ground project work and all of the other advocacy work that you do in this space. It's really invaluable. And frankly, we need more people to line up shoulder to shoulder on this stuff, because that's the only way we move the needle is need everybody to speak up. So appreciate you.
Thanks, David.
I don't know how you sign off yours, Josh, but I always sign off our podcast with life is about experiences. So go have one.
Happy trails. Yeah, good stuff.
Gathered around the campfire's flickering glow, stories ignited, bridging hearts and minds as the world outside faded and connection reigned supreme. Welcome to Campfire Chats.
And joining me today, got a guest here that I'm excited to introduce you to, Nephi Cole. Nephi, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Josh, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
So,
I'm glad to have you part of this.
It's nice to be here. I'm currently, I do two things, and so I can wear both hats now on this podcast. So I'm a Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation, NSSF, and I'm also co-host of a show called Your Mountain Podcast. Those things are both separate, but the podcast is something that I do that I really enjoy. And then I'm very lucky to represent the industry that is a huge part of the hunting and shooting sports world.
Yeah, Nephi, I've, as a member of the State Shooting Complex Task Force and seeing some of the testimony that you've provided in a couple of our meetings now, very important industry, very important information you've been able to provide. But I think it's probably fair to say that the one common denominator that what you do in that industry, in that arena, it has an intricate part of anybody and everybody who calls themselves a sportsman or sportswoman. Fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely. For folks that don't know NSSF, it's 9,000 member companies. It's anybody that makes, moves, sells firearms, ammunition components. So it's anybody from Athlon optics to Vortex optics to Winchester to Beretta, from mom and pop gun shops to the largest stores like Shields and Cabela's. Those are our members. And that space is one that's really fun to work in because I've always been a, big fan of wildlife and conservation. And of course, my members are the guys that pay the Pittman-Robertson tax, which is the manufacturing tax that most people don't know about on arms and ammunition, but that ultimately ends up being over $1 billion a year in funding that goes to state wildlife agencies, that goes to conservation. We fund roughly 50% of the budget of your average game and fish agency. And so it's something that we're pretty proud of.
And I would think that as a sportsman yourself, to be able to work in an industry, knowing what that industry represents, it's got to be a good day to go to the office.
Yeah, it's always a privilege. I really feel blessed to be able to do it.
All right. Part of Campfire Chat is to talk about how important hunting is as a heritage and as a culture, something that, when you live in Wyoming, as you do as well, you don't have to go far to find somebody who hunts, and it's part of their life or a way of life for them. But in the bigger picture, when you look at our union, hunters are a really small demographic. And I think it's very important that we can promote that hunting is a very valuable tool in conservation. It's very valuable in the management of our wildlife. But as a way of life, it's also a very important staple for many in their dietary consumption. Is hunting, how important is it at the Cole home that Nephi has success in the field and puts meat in the freezer? Is that important?
It depends. Like success in the field and puts meat in the freezer are two different things for me.
Very
and
good
I think they're
point. They are.
And two different things for my family too. And I think is it important? It absolutely is. And here's why it's important, because of what it teaches. As you mentioned, about 4% of Americans. But when you look at who we are as a culture and as a people, I can look at my 9th great-grandfather. His will exists, and he came over on the Mayflower. And when you look at his will, you can see a fowling piece along with several different weapons that were used for hunting. And I bring that up because that's who we are. As Americans, we are self-sufficient. We are problem solvers. We go and we try and fix we try and challenge the demons in the unknown. We make ourselves better that way. And it's what makes people identify Americans as cowboys. That's really what they're talking about. They're talking about that spirit of adventure and overcoming. And that's something in my house. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old and a golden retriever. And every one of those learns from hunting. They learn from being out in the field, and they learn those lessons. And so it really is about being able to put something on the table that they recognize where it came from is important, because they respect the work that went into getting that. But doing the work is even more important. Being out there and having the experience and being cold and being uncomfortable and overcoming that and figuring out how the world works and being part of the food chain. Those are all lessons that you just can't put a value on. Like, I don't know how you'd ever say this is what that's worth 10 or 20 years from now in their lives and their success. I know it's been invaluable in my life, and it's part of why I enjoy working where I work, because I feel incredibly indebted to make sure that the things that help shape what I consider to be who I am and what's important are there for them and for anybody else that says that this is their country. I have a debt to make sure that other people can do the things that I can do.
Yeah, said Nephi. Where does the actual taking to the field and hunting, where does that first memory take you back to when you think about the influences and the inspiration for you to want to pursue this as a way of life for you, and then ultimately your willingness to responsibility you feel to pass it on to your children? Was it with your family? Was it with your grandfather, your father? Where does that come from? Where is that rooted?
It's my grandfather. My grandfather, P.R. Cole, he was a ranch manager, and he didn't own a ranch. He managed a ranch. And I remember it was along the Yakima River in Washington State. I would see him going out with my uncle, who was an outfitter there. And my dad really didn't hunt, but my grandfather and my uncle going out and taking care of horses, doctoring horses, packing stuff up, heading into the backcountry. For my grandfather, it was putting me on a saddle with him and letting me ride along with him for a little ways before I got kicked out to go back to the house to hang out with grandma. And it just shaped me of everything that I wanted to be. I knew everything that I wanted to be at 5 years old, and it was that guy with that hat on and doing the things that he did. And it's just something that it speaks to me. I guess it doesn't speak to everybody, but it does to me.
So you've been able to instill the same value and passion that you have from that early exposure as a child to have that be a part of way of life for your children still at home. Do you have a favorite hunting experience that you've already been able to share with your children?
Yeah, man. Yeah. With my kids, I don't know that the 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, I'd say with the 10 different experiences. For me, there's some experiences that I've had. Probably my most powerful experience is sitting in the thoroughfare or when in there with some buddies, just us running our own ragtag pack string up in there. And I remember one day sitting on top of a mountain looking over Thoroughfare Creek, and this is almost 2 decades ago, and realizing at that moment that there was no one else in the view shed, no other people that you could identify or see, and being that alone just really, I think spiritually, I believe it centers you in the universe, and it did me. And that lonely mountaintop, that's probably one of my most special experiences, although there are many. And then with my 13-year-old, it was he shot a turkey, his first turkey this last year, and that was really special for me, just spending that time with him. And it's hopefully the first of many experiences I get to have with those two, and hopefully we can continue to build and get better and better experiences. But then I don't think you can talk to anybody, I would bet, that spends time in the field. I don't think you can go through a season and not have some experience that you can't look back on and be like, wow, that was special. That was a lesson learned. I'm glad. That's why hunting is awesome, because every time you go, there's something, you earn something. For everything you put out, you earn something back.
Yeah, Nephi, how important is the consumption of wild game meat? Is that part of your regular diet?
Absolutely. It's funny that you ask, because we have a variety in the freezer right now. We still got some antelope and some elk, trying to add some more elk to that. The deer are all gone. We'll try and throw some whitetails in there this year with the boys. And we got beef in there. We cook a lot at home. And it's funny, both my kids, my wife thinks it's insane that they both prefer, when I'm cooking steaks, that they both reach for the plate that has the wild game on it before they try and scoop off a piece of the beef. And I love that they feel that. I feel that, because it's about more than just the protein. The fact that you know where it comes from, and literally you identify with that antelope. You're like, yeah, everything about this I know. And that day, you taste that day that you took that antelope when you're cutting up that backstrap, it makes it's worth more. I don't know how you can, put a value on. You can't put a value on that. It's just always going to be worth more. It doesn't matter whether it's Kobe beef, but unless you raised that cow yourself and walked it through the plant, it's always going to be more special to be something that you brought home and with yourself or with people you care about.
Yeah, and I think when that announcement is made that this is what we're having for dinner, and you can flip through your mental Rolodex and recall the hunt and know you remember everything. You remember the weather, you remember the good, the bad, the challenges, the successes of it. Yeah, it does. It adds to the flavor. You can't bottle up that spot.
I had some Wyoming range for lunch, actually. It was delicious.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
All right. So here's a question I would like to ask. Just in your lifetime of hunting and your exposure very early on with PR Cole, equipment and technologies have changed dramatically over our lifetime. And we have seen this huge increase of technology. Products have just gotten better. Glass has gotten better. People can shoot farther. Rifles have gotten better. Calibers that are available today weren't even around 10, 15 years ago. And it's really the precision and the dialing in of just the gear. We no longer buy clothes. We buy gear that allows us to bivvy in the field for weeks at a time. Do you have an upgrade of a specific piece of gear that in the last decade or as an adult where disposable income might have been more of an opportunity for you to invest in an upgrade of gear? Is there one that comes to mind where you're just like, yeah, gosh, I wish I'd have had this a long time ago because this has been a game changer for me?
Yeah, range finding binocular. Without a doubt, a range finding binoculars. At first, I was going to say your optic in general. For a brief story, my uncle, when I finally could afford my own rifle in college, which I bought it was a layaway gun. When I put an optic on it, I put a Leupold on it. And the reason I did that is because he said, like, you could go cheap on your optic, but you want to be able to hunt anywhere, anytime, and don't skimp. And I was able to find pretty budget friendly. It was a time, I think it was a VX3 or something like that. Optics are real game changers just because the repeatability and the ability to put the bullet where it's supposed to be. It's the optic. It's the optic, it's the optic, it's the optic. But taking a step past that, anymore, you can get an optic right now that 15 years ago would have been unobtainium. And now for a very reasonable price, you can find optics that have good glass, that are nitrogen purged, and that have repeatable dials on them. And then what it allows us to do as a sportsman, it allows us to now shoot a caliber that, it allows us to take game more ethically. Why do I say that? Because now you can shoot a 6.5 Creedmoor at 300 yards or even 350 yards, and with enough energy because of modern bullet technology to be able to deliver to the right spot on the animal an ethical kill. And that depends on us being out in the field and shooting quite a bit. And so now I can put that 130 grain bullet in the same spot that in previous years, because of technology of the optic, I might have had to have a Weatherby, a super magnum of some kind because of point blank and to be more sure that the bullet would be there. Now you literally can use the math, but in order to make the math work, you got to have a good rangefinder. And so a range finding binocular, I think, absolutely, it's the one thing for rifle hunting. So I'd change my mind if we're talking about bow hunting. But for rifle hunting, having the ability on your chest to, number one, be able to find stuff, and number two, to be able to accurately constrain yourself. And here's what I mean by that. I know my limits, but sometimes when you get out into the field, you look at an animal out there and there are people, and I know before I had good stuff, you're guessing at how far away stuff is, whether or not you can make the shot, whether or not you can put the energy there. And anymore, there's no reason to guess. You should be able to look at the animal, hit the range, and know immediately whether or not you're going to make the shot. What I always tell people is when I pull the trigger on an animal, I don't want it to be a surprise that I hit it. I want it to be surprised if I didn't. And so with the optics that we have availability to now at a reasonable price, and with a good range finding binocular, you can find them and you can tell how far away that they are, and you can make an informed decision on whether or not that gun that you're behind, whether or not you personally have the capability, and whether or not the cartridge has the capability to ethically take that animal at that distance. And I think technology has improved, but here's what we now have the opportunity to do as hunters. We have the opportunity to make sure, literally, we can make it in one shot. It's not a guess. It's not a potentially wounded and lost animal. We just have the ability now to be more accurate than we've ever been. And we should be. If we can put a bullet every time into a tennis ball, why wouldn't we? That's something, a lot of people resist technology, and you'll hear these arguments about we shouldn't let people, shoot this thing or that thing or have access to the technology because it makes us too good at hunting. I have a really mixed feeling on that. I think my opinion is we should all have the capability to put a bullet onto a softball sized target at 600 yards without question. Does that mean we take that shot? No, it does not. We should be able to shoot at 1,000 yards and stalk to within 10 yards. That's how we ethically hunt. And that's what we owe to the animals that we hunt. But if we can be the best possible at that terminal performance, why wouldn't we be? Why wouldn't we be? That's the responsibility we have to the game. And there's no reason not to be the absolute best that we put on earth at it. Invest in the tools, invest in yourself, invest in the skill set to be the absolute best killer on the mountain. You might as well.
Yeah, on that note, Nephi, when you talk about invest in yourself and you invest in that skill set, what kind of time do you put in to hone that skill set, to be able to have that confidence to take to the field, to know that you know what your limitations are and you've maximized what those can be with the tool in hand?
So I just say it's thousands of rounds, and it's thousands of rounds. And you don't have to shoot thousands of rounds your 7 rem mag that you love, and because you're not going to be able to afford that, and the gun's not going to take it. You're going to burn out the gun. You can only put you can put 1,000 rounds through a big Magnum before the accuracy in that barrel is going to demand that you rebarrel the gun. Luckily, shooting's a perishable skill, but it's transferable. So you can really shoot little guns as long as you treat them like big guns. So whether it's your 22 long rifle, put a really good optic on it, and then see how good you can shoot at 50 yards and make sure that you can shoot really good at 100 yards with that gun that doesn't go very fast. And if you can do that, that translates now to your big game rifle. Your big game rifle, if you've got good trigger control and good fundamentals of shooting, that trigger control and those fundamentals are going to transfer over to the bigger gun. So shoot a lot of 223. Interestingly enough, an AR-15 is one of the best training tools you can possibly use for hunting big game. Why? Because inherently, those semi-automatic ARs, they have that trigger pull on them is typically not great. It can be decent, but it's not like bolt gun awesome. And they have a longer lock time. They also have there's more mass moving inside that gun. And so what that means is you've got to maintain your grip on the gun, and you've got to maintain your weight behind the gun. You got to maintain your sight picture perfectly throughout the operation of that gun. And what that does is it trains you so that now when you shift over to your bolt gun that you're going to be taking, your game with, likely, all that stuff, you really just start a better shooter, and you turn a 1-minute gun into a half-minute gun in terms of your accuracy. You turn, before you were happy with hitting a pie plate, now you're going to be shooting baseballs instead. And it's all relative, but again, time on the range, that's just maximum, just shooting. And it doesn't really matter to a degree what you shoot. You can get really good at bow hunting. And if you are consistent, and if you go out and take your bow out and you just shoot and you shoot and your technique's good, your breath control's good, your trigger squeeze is good and letting that arrow go, those same principles are going to transfer over to a rifle. There'll be some stuff that'll be a little bit different, of course, with your technique, because it's just a different ball game. But training your mind and training away target panic and your focus and everything like that are all things that you can do across the spectrum of shooting sports that are then going to make you better in the field when you actually have to pull the trigger. And Dave and I, a friend who we both know, we used to argue about this all the time. And the funny thing is, you can be a great hunter and be able to get out there and find big game. You can be the best at it. But what you can't do is if you're like, hey, I don't need to practice shooting because I'm going to find big game no matter what. You can't get good on 20 rounds a year. Can't get good at just sighting it at the range. You really have to put yourself in positions where make a bet with your friend, get yourself some time constraints, get some target panic, talk smack to each other and see how it affects your mind and how it affects your shooting. The better we can get at baking all that stuff out, the more it becomes where the shot, when you actually do get that shot at a big game animal, that just becomes automatic. And there really literally is no thinking. You take the range, you've got the range, and if you know that you're within the capabilities of the gun, and then you're like, oh yeah, I know my capabilities, everything else just goes away. And you don't have that anxiety over wondering whether the shot is good enough. That disappears. And that ought to be the goal of every hunter, literally, is just, you shouldn't feel that way. And if you haven't spent enough time at the range to where you've gotten over shot anxiety, go back to the range and keep doing it, because I promise you'll get there. And it's a good thing.
It just takes time. It
just takes time.
Speaking of time, dream hunt, Nephi, that you haven't done yet, but something that certainly you have put some thought into, or you planned that someday, this is a bucket list item in my world of hunting memories that I want to bring to fruition. What's that dream hunt look like for Nephi Cole?
I want to get up to Alaska, and I'd like to go up to Alaska just because it takes me to the thoroughfare of the discussion. When I was in the thoroughfare with my buddies sitting on that mountain, I thought to myself, wow, this has got to be the most Alaskas you can get to Alaska without being in Alaska. That feeling of being just out there and a part of the food chain, not even necessarily at the top of it, but just a piece of it. And I'd like to get up there and spend some time in Alaska. And one of these days, there won't be legislative sessions to chase, and there won't be politics to be argued about, and I'll be able to scratch out the time to go do that, hopefully before too long.
Yeah, and to be able to maybe potentially share it with one of your children. As I've gotten older, I have found that there's always been some individual hunts, adventures, or chasing of specific big game ungulates that you want to check that box. But I'm sure you're starting to see it with the 10 and 13-year-old. But the quality of the time in the field and sharing of those memories with someone, you don't even have to be the trigger man. It's just being there. That just seems, my daughter, she knows I would like to go on a Yukon moose hunt someday. But actually, if I really had to draw it up, I would want her to be on the Yukon moose hunt, and I would just want to be there with her. There's something about that bond that is made in the field with your own offspring or your friends or family that it's just as important as the trophy that maybe you had luck in bagging.
Yeah, it's kind of bringing this conversation full circle. It's really who we are. That's our legacy. That's where we come from as Americans. That is our history. It's how we're built. And maybe I say Americans, and maybe it's much bigger than just that. Maybe it's who we are as people and humans. It is who we are. And sharing that with the next generation, if it's about the closest thing to immortality as we're probably going to get a chance to find here, isn't it?
Nephi, thanks. It's been a pleasure to have you on Campfire Chat. I appreciate your insight and your experience and just the ability to share and give people a glimpse to your world and how you value it and cherish it and hold it dear, and the efforts that you take professionally to ensure it and to maintain it. So thank you.
Josh, thank you.
You bet. That's Campfire Chat. Nephi Cole talking about how important hunting and the way of life of hunting and the sport of hunting, the tools of hunting, the value of hunting, and what it means to us. Quite frankly, I don't think I could say it any better. He said it best. As a people, as human beings. Nephi Cole, Campfire Chat. Thank you.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.